Tycoon celebrates birthday with Mistress, while his pregnant wife cries behind the guests. The grand chandelier sparkled like 1,000 stars above the ballroom, casting its golden light over the gleaming marble floors. The sound of string instruments filled the air, elegant and refined, harmonizing with the quiet chatter of Seoul's most influential elite. Everything was perfect, at least on the surface. Guests laughed, clinked glasses, admired the extravagant floral arrangements, and marveled at the towering ice sculpture at the center of the hall. But behind the grandeur of the Tycoon Ji-hoon's birthday celebration, something heartbreaking stirred in the shadows. Outside the main hall, in a quiet corner just beyond the heavy velvet curtains, stood Soo-jin. She wore a flowing, pale blue maternity dress, one hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. Her eyes, dark, weary, and full of questions, glanced toward the light spilling from the party. From her place in the shadows, she could hear her husband's laughter echoing among the crowd. She had not been invited, not officially. There was no card with her name, no seat reserved at the table. No one had greeted her when she arrived, not even Ji-hoon. Still she came. Perhaps she was foolish to think he would notice, that he would pause amid the applause and find her there, waiting for him. That maybe, just maybe, he would remember the woman who once meant everything to him. Her heart ached as she looked on. There he was, her husband, her Ji-hoon, dressed in a sleek black suit, with that familiar confident smile. But the way he held his glass of champagne and leaned close to whisper into the ear of the young woman beside him made her breath catch in her throat. Mireille. The girl stood poised beside him like a queen in waiting. Young, radiant, unapologetically present. Soo-jin had seen her before. At company dinners, in social media posts, always by Ji-hoon's side. She'd heard whispers. She'd asked questions. But Ji-hoon had always brushed them away with a sigh and a dismissive wave. There's nothing going on. You're imagining things again. But now, there were no more illusions to protect her. Soo-jin gripped the curtain tighter, her fingers trembling. The silk bunched between her knuckles as she tried to keep herself steady. The baby kicked softly inside her, like a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. "I'm sorry, little one," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I thought tonight would be different." Just 2 years ago, that ballroom had hosted their anniversary party. Ji-hoon had held her close then, whispered promises in her ear, told her how proud he was, how much he wanted to build a family. That night, he had kissed her in front of everyone. How had that man disappeared so completely? She closed her eyes, forcing the memory away. Maybe she had changed. Maybe the pregnancy had made her less interesting to him. Maybe her tired eyes, her slower steps, the way she fell asleep early now, had made her less desirable. But wasn't this the life they'd chosen together? Wasn't this child part of his dream, too? From within the ballroom, a cheer erupted. The toast. Someone raised a glass and said his name. To Ji-hoon, the man who has everything. Soo-jin felt her stomach twist. Everything? Everything except the woman carrying his child. Everything except the family he had abandoned while still living in the same house. A waiter walked past, not noticing her behind the curtain. She pulled further into the shadows. She couldn't be seen like this, uninvited, pregnant, alone. Her pride wouldn't allow it. And yet, her heart refused to leave. She needed to see. Maybe to break what was left of the illusion. Maybe to find the strength to let go. Her gaze fell once more on Ji-hoon. He leaned in close to Mireille, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Mireille laughed, touching his hand with practiced intimacy. The world tilted slightly. Tears welled in Soo-jin's eyes, blurring the lights, the faces, the golden shimmer of the party. But she didn't wipe them away. Let them fall. Let them burn. Behind her, one of the caterers glanced over, startled to find her there. "Ma'am, do you need help?" Soo-jin blinked, coming back to herself. She nodded quickly, offering a weak smile. "I'm fine, thank you." She turned away, walking slowly down the hallway, away from the music, away from the betrayal. Her footsteps echoed quietly as she passed portraits of past events hung on the walls, Photos of her and Ji-hoon smiling, hand in hand, his arm around her waist. Her laughter caught midair. Ghosts. She paused before one of them, touching the glass lightly. "I used to believe in you," she said softly. "I used to believe we were building something real." A tear slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. The night was just beginning, but the celebration was already over for her. And somewhere deep in her soul, a shift began. The pain, so raw and consuming, started to mold itself into something harder. Not hatred, not yet, but awareness of her worth, of what she had sacrificed, of what she could no longer allow. As she stepped out into the cold night air, the wind whispered through the trees like a quiet promise. This was not the end. Not for her. Not for the child she carried. Inside, the music swelled. Another toast. Another round of applause. But Soo-jin no longer cared, because for the first time in a long time she was listening not to the crowd, but to herself. Você diz. Certo? Agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada tópico que for desenvolve. Me conte sobre o tópico tu com dialogo como su faço espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com muita emoco. Com muitos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters o chat GPT diz. The wind followed Soo-jin down the long driveway of the estate, tugging at her dress like a pleading child. She clutched her coat around her belly and kept walking, her steps slow, her heart heavier than ever before. The cold air hit her cheeks, but it was the warmth of her own tears that she felt most. Behind her, laughter still poured from the ballroom, distant, muffled, and cruel. She didn't look back. The driver didn't ask questions. He opened the car door with a bow, unaware of the storm behind her silent expression. She sank into the back seat, wrapping her arms around her belly, not for warmth, but for grounding. Her fingers trembled as they brushed over the fabric, feeling the faint movement of the life inside her. That soft flutter, like the wings of a bird, proof that she wasn't entirely alone. "Do you think he even noticed I was there?" she whispered, not to the driver, but to the baby. "Do you think he remembered us?" The car pulled away, and the mansion disappeared into the distance. The apartment was dark when she arrived. Not the mansion where she had once lived like a queen, but a quiet temporary space she'd chosen for peace. Far from the noise, far from his world. She turned on a dim light and slipped off her shoes. Every part of her ached. She went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, but didn't drink. Her reflection in the window caught her off guard. She barely recognized herself. Her once glowing face now looked pale, tired. Her eyes, once full of hope, were hollow. Lowering herself into a chair, she finally let go. The sobs came quietly at first, controlled, but then they burst out violent, deep, desperate. She covered her mouth with her hand, afraid the neighbors might hear. But nothing could silence that kind of pain. It was the cry of a heart that had broken slowly, piece by piece, day after day. She tried to remember the last time Ji-hoon had held her. The last time he'd kissed her forehead after dinner. The last time he'd asked how she was feeling, how the baby was growing. And nothing came. All she could recall were his cold responses, the way he came home late, always distracted, always tired. How he answered her with a nod, a shrug, a mumbled excuse. And how she had told herself again and again, "He's just busy. It'll pass. He still loves me. He has to." But tonight, the truth had unfolded in full view, not just in whispers or suspicions, but in the eyes of every guest who ignored her, in the laughter of a woman who wore confidence like perfume, who didn't have to hide behind curtains, and in the silence of a husband who had chosen to erase her. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater and looked down at her belly again. "I'm so sorry you had to feel that," she said, her voice breaking. "You don't deserve a father who treats us like we don't matter." Her phone buzzed on the table. A message. For a second, her heart jumped. Maybe it was him, Maybe he had seen her leave. Maybe he felt something. She picked it up. Her fingers trembled. It was from the clinic. A reminder for her next prenatal checkup. Not him. Not even close. She let the phone fall back onto the table. Her mind drifted to the beginning, the sweet beginning. To Jihoon's eyes lighting up when he first saw the ultrasound. To how he had kissed her stomach, whispered to the baby, promised a life full of love and security. To the way he once held her face in his hands and said, "You're my everything, Soo-jin. You and our baby. My whole world." What changed? Was it her? Was it the way she looked now? Swollen? Exhausted? Not glamorous enough? Or had he simply fallen out of love and into something easier? She was exactly what Jihoon used to chase. Sharp, stunning, full of ambition. And most of all, uncomplicated. No crying in the middle of the night. No swollen ankles. No moods, no worries, no doctor appointments. But Soo-jin wasn't just a woman. She was his wife, his partner, the mother of his child. Why wasn't that enough? She moved to the bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and pulled out an old photo album. Pages filled with smiles, vacation snapshots, their wedding day. There they were, young, glowing with promise. There he was, lifting her veil, eyes full of wonder. There she was, laughing in his arms. She touched the image with the tip of her finger, then closed the album gently. "No more pretending," she whispered. "I won't let our child grow up thinking this kind of love is normal. I won't let them feel invisible, like I did tonight." The resolve in her voice startled even herself. She lay down slowly, one hand on her stomach, and closed her eyes. The baby shifted gently, as if responding to her heartbeat. It was just the two of them now, but that was enough. It had to be. In the distance, the city lights glowed silently, and in the stillness of that small apartment, a mother's love began to rise. Not in desperation, but in fierce, steady strength. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling that quiet presence again. A heartbeat that had become her anchor. A deep breath, then another. But the silence was short-lived. Her phone rang. Not a message this time. A call. A known number. She hesitated for a second before answering. Her voice, still soft from sleep, trembled slightly. "Hello." There was a brief pause on the other end. Then, the familiar voice, low, calm, carefully measured. "Soo-jin." Her fingers tightened around the phone. She didn't need to ask who it was. Jihoon. Of course it was. Her breath caught in her chest. For a second, she didn't speak. She didn't know what he would say. If he would apologize, explain, lie, or pretend like nothing had happened. "Are you all right?" he asked, as if reading from a script. "I didn't see you leave last night." Soo-jin closed her eyes. His words landed like cold raindrops on warm skin. Not "I missed you," not "I'm sorry," not even "Where were you?" Just a bland, emotionless check-in, like a man following protocol. "I wasn't really there," she replied quietly. "Not in any way. That mattered." There was silence on the line. An awkward, tense silence, as if he didn't know how to respond. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I didn't know you were coming. You should have told me." She almost laughed. "Told you? Jihoon, I'm your wife. I'm carrying your child. I shouldn't have to tell you to include me in your life." Another silence. The kind that stretches and twists and reveals everything he's not saying. "Look," he said at last, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. "I've been under a lot of pressure. Investors, projects. I didn't plan everything. The PR team handled most of the event." "Stop," she whispered. He went quiet. "Just stop." The tears were rising again, but she fought them back. She wouldn't let him hear her cry. "Not today." "I saw you," she continued. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "I saw you with her, laughing, whispering, kissing her behind the stage." He said nothing, but the silence this time was heavier, damning. "I wanted to believe it was just work," she whispered. "That maybe you were confused, that you were just tired." But last night, Ji-hoon, you didn't even look for me. You didn't even care that I was there." She paused, her voice suddenly sharpening. "You didn't see me crying behind your guests. You didn't see me collapse in the hallway. And you didn't notice when I disappeared." "I didn't mean," he started, but she cut him off. "You didn't mean to hurt me?" she said bitterly. "Or you didn't care enough to realize you were?" He sighed, deeply now, as if exhausted by the very idea of this conversation. "This isn't the time to have this discussion." "Of course not," she snapped, the anger rising now. "Because the timing is never right when it's about me. You always have an excuse, your work, your schedule, your image. But Ji-hoon, I'm not invisible. I'm not some shadow in your perfect little world. I'm your wife." And then, her voice broke, just for a moment. "I was your wife." The line went dead quiet again. But now she didn't wait for him to fill it. She ended the call. The sound of the disconnect was like a final breath. She sat still for a while after that, her chest rising and falling with the weight of emotions too heavy to name. Anger, grief, humiliation, and something else, something colder. Clarity. Later that afternoon, Soo-jin walked the familiar streets of Seoul alone, a scarf wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her steps careful, deliberate. She didn't go to the mansion. She didn't go to his office. She went to the park, a place where they used to walk in the early days, before the money, before the company, when he was just Ji-hoon, the boy who brought her hot coffee on cold mornings and whispered dreams about their future. She found the bench beneath the cherry blossom tree, the leaves now green and full, not yet turning to pink. Spring would come soon. A young couple walked past her, laughing, holding hands. It stung. She looked down at her belly again. "You deserve a better example of love," she said softly. "And I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I promise you I will." She felt the baby move again, stronger this time, like a reply, like hope. Just then, her phone buzzed again. A message, this time from an old friend. "Min-soo, heard about the party. Are you okay? I'm in town. Want to talk?" Her eyes widened slightly. Min-soo. They hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since he left for the US to finish his medical fellowship. He'd always been kind, quiet, warm in a way Ji-hoon never truly was. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She didn't reply right away, not because she didn't want to, but because for the first time in weeks, she realized something was shifting. Ji-hoon wasn't the only part of her story. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be the end of it either. She stood slowly from the bench. The sky above had started to darken, clouds thick with rain. But Soo-jin didn't hurry. She looked down at her phone again. Min-soo's message still lingered there. And this time, she replied, "I'd like to talk. I'm at the park near the old bookstore. Around noon." The reply came instantly. "I'll be there." Her hand hovered for a moment before placing the phone aside. Something about those words brought warmth to her chest, but it was a quiet warmth. Not hope exactly, just human recognition, something she hadn't felt in a long time. By the time she stepped out of her apartment, a light drizzle had begun to fall, cold drops tapping gently against her umbrella. She walked slowly, careful with each step, her coat tied snugly around her belly. As she neared the park, she saw him waiting beneath the awning of a small cafe, taller than she remembered, with a calm presence that still somehow felt the same. Min-soo turned when he saw her, his eyes softening immediately. "Soo-jin," he said quietly, and it wasn't just a greeting, it was a sigh, a release, a question wrapped in concern. She offered a faint smile. "You came." "Of course I did." He stepped forward and opened the cafe door for her. "You shouldn't be walking around in this weather." "I needed the walk," she said softly. "I needed to remember what the outside feels like." He didn't press further. He just nodded and followed her inside. They sat in a corner booth, the window fogged slightly from the contrast between rain and warmth. The server brought them tea, and for a while, neither of them spoke. There was something comforting in the quiet. Finally, Min-soo looked at her hands, then her face. "I heard about the party," he said carefully. And I saw a photo online. Jihoon and you don't have to say her name. Sujin cut in, her voice low. I saw more than just the photo. He leaned back slightly, nodding, absorbing her pain without rushing to fix it. How long? He asked gently. She shook her head. I don't even know. Months, maybe longer. I kept ignoring the signs. I thought, if I stayed quiet, if I just gave him time, he'd come back. To me, her eyes dropped to the table. But last night, he didn't even notice I was there. I watched him celebrate with her, smile with her, and I was just a shadow, crying behind his guests like I didn't exist. Min-soo exhaled, long and controlled. That's not love, Sujin. No, she said bitterly. It's not. He hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice more intimate. You were never meant to be invisible. Not to him. Not to anyone. Her throat tightened. The tears came quickly this time, and she didn't fight them. She didn't apologize either. They slid down her cheeks silently as she looked at someone who didn't look away. I don't know what to do, she whispered. I have this baby, and I'm scared. I thought I was building a family, a future, and now I'm just a woman trying to hold herself together. You're more than that, he said firmly. You're stronger than you think. You don't have to pretend with me. She looked at him then, truly looked. There was no pity in his gaze, just presence. And it was that, more than the words, that broke something open inside her. When I saw you walk in, he added softly, I didn't see a woman who was broken. I saw someone trying to survive. And doing it. Sujin gave a soft, broken laugh. Some days it feels like surviving is all I can do. Some days, he agreed. But not all of them. They sat in that silence for a while. Let the rain fall outside. Let the past breathe. Then Min-soo reached into his coat pocket and placed something gently on the table. A folded piece of paper. She looked at it, confused. It's an old photo, he said, of our university group. You and me, back when things were simpler. I found it the other day. Sujin unfolded it with care. There they were, young, messy-haired, laughing with coffee cups in their hands. Jihoon wasn't in the photo. It was just her, Min-soo, and a few others who had long drifted apart. Her eyes lingered on her own face in the image. She looked alive, confident. Like, I miss her, she murmured. She's still here, he said, just buried under pain. But you'll find her again. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but understanding. A kind of sacred, delicate bridge between what was lost and what could be rebuilt. Sujin folded the photo and slid it into her coat pocket. Thank you, she said, not just for the picture, but for being there, for seeing her. As they stood to leave, Min-soo hesitated. Can I walk you home? She considered it, then nodded. I'd like that. They stepped into the rain together. He held the umbrella above her without asking. His hand hovered near her back, close enough to offer comfort, but never assuming. The city felt quieter somehow, more bearable, and for the first time in weeks, Sujin didn't feel like she was walking through it alone. As they crossed the street, her phone buzzed again. This time it was Jihoon. We need to talk. Now. She stared at the message, her jaw tightening. Min-soo glanced at her. Is it him? She nodded slowly, then slipped the phone into her bag without replying. I'll talk to him, she said. But not today. They walked on in silence. And somewhere between the gray clouds above and the soft sound of their footsteps on wet pavement, something began to shift. There were no more tears. Not tonight. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her fingers resting lightly on her stomach. He texted, she whispered, almost to herself. He wants to talk. The baby shifted, a small nudge beneath her ribs. Sujin smiled faintly and sighed. I don't even know what I'd say to him anymore. What is there left to explain? She reached over and pulled out the folded photo Min-soo had given her. Her thumb brushed across the edges, and with it came a memory. Her younger self laughing so freely, so unaware of the woman she'd have to become. That version of her hadn't yet learned what betrayal tasted like. Her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Jihoon, are you ignoring me? She exhaled sharply through her nose. The audacity of that question almost made her laugh. Ignoring him? No, she had spent months being the one ignored. Still, she picked up the phone, staring at the screen for a long moment before unlocking it. I'll come to the house tomorrow, she typed. If you want to talk, we do it face to face. His reply was immediate. Fine. No emotion. No apology. Just expectation. She placed the phone down, her heart a storm of nerves and fire. It was time to look him in the eyes, to let him see what he had done, not just to her, but to the life they had created together. The next morning, rain threatened again, but it held off just long enough for Soo-jin to make her way to the mansion. As the car pulled up the familiar driveway, she stared at the building. Once her home, now just an empty frame. Everything looked the same. The grand columns, the polished windows, the pristine garden at the entrance. But she wasn't the same woman who used to live inside those walls. She stepped out of the car slowly, the weight of her belly grounding her in every step. The door opened before she could ring the bell. Jihoon stood there, sharp suit, neatly styled hair, jaw tense. For a second, he looked at her like he didn't recognize her. Or maybe he just didn't expect her to look stronger. Soo-jin, he said. She didn't respond. She walked past him and into the house. The air inside smelled like expensive wood polish and lilies. She wondered briefly if Miare had picked out the flowers. He followed her into the living room. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said, pouring himself a glass of water. I thought maybe you were avoiding me. She turned to face him, arms crossed lightly over her belly. You thought wrong. He looked at her for a long moment, then set the glass down. I know what you saw at the party. No, she interrupted. You don't know what I saw. You weren't watching me. You haven't watched me in a long time. He flinched slightly. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Mireille? She wasn't meant to. To what? Soo-jin asked, stepping forward. To outshine your pregnant wife? To erase me from my own husband's birthday? To humiliate me in front of Seoul's entire elite? He didn't answer. I sat there behind a curtain, watching you toast with the woman you've been hiding in plain sight. You didn't even look for me. You didn't even notice when I left. His jaw clenched. It's complicated. No, Jihoon, she snapped. It's not. You chose her. Over me. Over our baby. Don't insult me by pretending you didn't. He looked at her belly then, for the first time in weeks, really looked. How far along are you now? He asked, his voice quieter. 7 months. He nodded slowly, then looked away, shame creeping into the edges of his expression. I've made mistakes, he said. She laughed bitterly. Mistakes? That's what you call this? You kissed another woman while I stood alone and pregnant behind your guests. You didn't just betray me, Jihoon. You erased me. His face twisted. I didn't mean to. Yes, you did. She cut in. You meant every step of this. You just didn't think I'd break. Or walk away. He walked toward her slowly, reaching out. Soo-jin, I still care. We can. She stepped back. No, her voice was firm. Her hand instinctively covered her belly. You don't get to say you care when you watched me suffer in silence and said nothing. When you left me in a house full of strangers while you held another woman like she was your future. He looked down, his shoulders sinking. I wasn't ready for all of this, he whispered. The pressure, the company, the baby. Her voice dropped, trembling now, but not weak. I was scared too, she said. But I stayed. I believed in us. I carried your child while you carried someone else in your heart. And I waited. God, I waited so long for you to come back. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it. He said nothing. He couldn't. I'm not here to punish you, she said quietly. I'm here to say goodbye. His head snapped up. What? I'm not your wife anymore, Jihoon. Not in the way that matters. And I won't raise our child in a house built on silence and betrayal. He took a step toward her again, his eyes desperate now. You can't just walk away. I already did. Her voice cracked, but her spine stayed straight. I came today so you could see me, so you could remember what you threw away. She turned then, slowly, with dignity, and walked toward the door. He didn't follow. The only sound behind her was the slow shattering of a man realizing he had lost everything. And it was his own hand that had done it. Outside, the rain thinned her skin, and the world around her blurred into streaks of gray and silver. Yet somehow it felt like the first real moment of freedom. Each raindrop was a release, a cleansing, of the lies, of the shame, of the suffocating silence that had haunted her for far too long. But her body, already strained by the stress of the last few days, began to waver. Her legs felt heavy. Her vision flickered at the edges. And then, a sharp cramp twisted through her lower abdomen. She gasped and stumbled forward, grabbing a street lamp for balance. "No, no, not now," she whispered, clutching her stomach, her face tightening in pain. Another cramp came, deeper this time. Her breath grew ragged. People passed her on the sidewalk, umbrellas overhead, eyes low, rushing to avoid the storm. She tried to call out, but her voice was swallowed by the sound of tires slicing through puddles. She reached into her coat pocket for her phone with trembling hands. It slipped, fell, shattered on the wet pavement. "Please!" she choked out, the pain now wrapping around her like a vice. She sank to her knees, raindrops splashing on her back. Someone screamed. Footsteps rushed toward her. "Ma'am, are you okay? Someone call an ambulance." Voices swirled, panicked, echoing. A stranger's hand on her shoulder. Another voice asking questions she couldn't understand. All she could feel was the pressure, the fear, the helplessness. Not now, not like this. She tried to speak, but another contraction surged through her, and her entire body curled forward. And then she heard it, faint at first but familiar. "Soo-Jin," a man's voice urgent. Near. "Soo-Jin, it's me. I'm here." Her eyes opened slowly, blurry with tears and rain. "Min-Soo." He dropped to his knees beside her, ignoring the water, the crowd, the chaos. "I saw you through the window," he said breathlessly. "I was driving by. I didn't know you were." He stopped himself. "Don't talk. I've got you. You're okay." "I think it's time," she gasped. His hand gripped hers. "I've called the ambulance. Just hold on. Breathe with me. Okay?" She nodded through the pain, teeth clenched, eyes squeezed shut. The sirens arrived minutes later, slicing through the noise like a blade. Min-Soo never let go of her hand as paramedics surrounded her, asking questions, lifting her onto a stretcher. Her fingers tightened around his. Desperate. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "I won't," he said without hesitation. "I'm right here." The hospital room was too bright, sterile. The air smelled of antiseptic and urgency. But inside her, it was chaos. The pain came in waves, relentless, unforgiving. Nurses moved around her quickly, voices low but firm. Machines beeped steadily beside her. She was sweating, her hair plastered to her face, her breath coming in shallow bursts. Min-Soo stood beside her bed, scrub cap now on, dressed in hospital greens. He wasn't her doctor, not here, not now. But he wasn't going to leave her alone. "You're doing great, Soo-Jin," he whispered, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "Just hold on. You're almost there." She turned to him, her eyes wild with pain and fear. What if something happens? What if the baby... "Hey, no. Look at me." His hand cupped her face, gentle but steady. "Nothing will happen. You're strong. Your baby is strong. You're not alone. Okay?" A contraction hit again and she screamed, arching, crying out as tears streamed down her face. Min-Soo held her hand through it all. And then one final push. A cry. A tiny, piercing cry. The sound of life. Soo-Jin collapsed back onto the bed, gasping, sobbing, laughing all at once. The nurse brought the baby to her wrapped in a soft, warm blanket. "It's a girl," she said softly. Sujin looked down at the child, her lips trembling. Her daughter's face was small, flushed, perfect. She reached out, arms shaking, and held her for the first time. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You're real." Her tears fell freely now, spilling onto the baby's head. "You're here," she whispered. "You made it." Minsu stepped back quietly, his eyes glistening. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The moment belonged only to her. To the mother who had cried in silence. To the woman who had been forgotten, but who had never stopped fighting. Hours later, the room had dimmed. The storm had passed. Outside, the moon hung low over the city. Sujin sat upright in bed, her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. Minsu sat on the small couch nearby, watching them with quiet admiration. "She has your eyes," he said gently. Sujin looked down, smiling. "She deserves to see the world differently than I did." There was a knock at the door. Soft, cautious. She knew before it opened who it was. Jihoon stepped in, dressed in dark clothes, eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. His gaze went straight to the baby, and then to her. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Sujin didn't speak either. She looked at him for a long time, really looked. At the man she once loved. At the man who had failed her in every way that counted. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. "Yes," Sujin replied. "She is." Silence hung between them. "I want to be part of her life," he said, voice shaking. Sujin nodded slowly. "You can visit. You can be her father. But you don't get to be my husband anymore." Jihoon's throat tightened. His hands trembled. "I know. I hope someday," she said, holding her daughter tighter. "You understand what you lost." Jihoon lowered his eyes. Minsu stood quietly, watching from the shadows, offering no judgment. Only truth. Only presence. Sujin kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering, "You will never feel what I felt. I promise." And in that hospital room, filled with echoes of endings and the hush of new beginnings, something quietly bloomed. A woman was reborn, but it was fragile. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light, and as the haze of sleep faded, the memories came rushing in. The pain, the fear, the sound of her daughter's first cry. And then, Jihoon's voice, his sudden appearance in the doorway like a shadow crawling back through the cracks. She hadn't cried when he left last night. She hadn't needed to. But now, in the silence of this new day, her mind lingered on that moment, replaying every detail. The way he looked at the baby, the hesitation in his voice, the way he said, "I know," when she told him they were done. Did he? Did he truly know what it meant to lose her? There was a knock at the door again. Her body tensed before she even looked up. But it wasn't Jihoon. It was Minsu. He walked in with a paper bag in one hand and a smile in the other. "Still sleeping?" he whispered, nodding toward the baby. Sujin nodded, her lips curling softly. "She's an angel when she's not hungry." He chuckled and set the bag down on the small table. "I brought you something warm. Seaweed soup. You remember?" Her eyes widened. "You didn't?" "It's tradition," he said, pulling out the thermos. "New mothers are supposed to eat this. Helps recovery. And I make it better than any place that would deliver." She looked at him, her expression softening. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said simply. "But I wanted to." She looked away, blinking rapidly. The kindness, so effortless, so unassuming. It cracked something open again. He poured the soup into a small bowl and placed it in front of her. As she sipped, the flavor transported her to a different time. Dorm room meals, midnight study sessions. Her younger self, sitting cross-legged on the floor with Minsu beside her, laughing at nothing and everything. "You never forgot the recipe," she said, voice touched with disbelief. "I never forgot you." She looked at him, startled. His words weren't dramatic. There was no weighty pause, no romantic declaration. Just the truth said plainly, honestly. She opened her mouth to respond, but a soft whimper from the baby drew her eyes down. Her daughter's tiny hands stretched in the air, her face scrunching as she stirred. Minsu stood quietly, watching as Sujin adjusted the blanket and gently rocked her back to sleep. "She already trusts you," he said quietly. "You can see it. I want to be enough for her," Sujin whispered. "I want her to grow up knowing she matters." "She will," he said, "because she has you." A silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with 1,000 things neither of them could say. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Then Sujin spoke again, her voice more uncertain. "He said he wants to be part of her life." Minsu's face didn't change. "And do you believe him?" "I don't know." She looked down. "I want her to have a father, but not at the cost of repeating this cycle, where love is given in pieces, and she grows up learning to accept less than she deserves." "She'll learn from you," he said, "and if you teach her strength, she'll know how to demand more." Sujin looked at him again, something vulnerable flickering in her gaze. "I wish you had been the one beside me in all of this." He hesitated for the first time. Then, slowly, he replied, "So do I." The door opened again. This time, the energy in the room shifted. Jihoon stood in the doorway. He saw Minsu, the soup, the baby, but he didn't say anything about it. "Can we talk?" he asked, looking directly at Sujin. Minsu stepped back instinctively. "I'll be outside." He nodded once at Sujin, then slipped out without a word. Jihoon approached the bed slowly. Sujin didn't move, her expression unreadable. "I didn't sleep last night," he said. She said nothing. He looked at the baby, then sat in the chair Minsu had vacated. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said carefully. I've been thinking about everything, about the way I hurt you, about the party, about how blind I was." Sujin's fingers moved gently through her daughter's hair. "I didn't come to hear apologies," she said quietly. "I came here to bring my child into the world. That's my only priority now." He flinched but nodded. "I deserve that. More than that. I want to be present. For her. For you, if you'll allow it." "You were present when I needed you most," she replied flatly. "You were just present with someone else." His mouth opened, but no defense came. "I loved you," she said, her voice low and trembling. "I stayed when you stopped trying. I carried our child while you carried guilt and excuses. And when I cried behind your guests at that party, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. You didn't see me anymore. Not really." Jihoon swallowed hard. "I see you now," he whispered. "It's too late," she said, not unkindly. "You can be her father. I won't take that away. But you lost the right to be by my side." He leaned forward, his eyes filled with something desperate. "Is there nothing I can do to change that?" She looked down at the baby, then back at him. "Be a better man than you were with me. For her. That's all I ask." He nodded slowly, shoulders heavy with the weight of his own failure. As he stood and walked toward the door, he paused. "She's lucky to have you." Sujin didn't respond. When the door closed, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The baby stirred again, and outside the room, Minsu waited, silent, steady. She turned to her daughter and smiled softly. But even peace, hard-earned and precious, trembles when the past won't stay buried. There was a knock at the door, gentle, not like before, not Jihoon. When she answered, a woman stepped inside, elegant, polished, composed. "Miare." Sujin's body froze. She clutched her daughter protectively and stared, as disbelief curled through her chest. Miare removed her coat slowly, carefully, as if she were entering a room not of confrontation, but of confession. Her eyes dropped to the baby for a moment before finding Sujin's. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "But I thought maybe it was time." Sujin's lips parted slightly, but no words came. The last time she had seen this woman, Miare had been wearing a red silk dress, smiling behind champagne glass, seated beside the man Sujin used to call her husband. Now, Miare stood here in front of her, stripped of pretense, something fragile flickering in her expression. 5 minutes, Sujin said sharply. And not one more. Mireille nodded. Fair. The air between them was heavy, not with hatred, but with something harder, truth. Mireille took a seat across the room. She didn't reach out. She didn't come closer. I wanted to say it to your face, she said. I didn't know you were at the party. If I had, I wouldn't have stayed so close to him. I wouldn't have laughed with him, kissed him. Sujin snapped, eyes burning. You wouldn't have let me see the way you replaced me? Mireille's shoulders dropped. I never thought of myself as a replacement. I thought he was already gone. Sujin's breath caught in her chest. The honesty of the statement hit harder than she expected. He was still my husband, she said through clenched teeth. I was still carrying his child. I know, Mireille whispered. I didn't at first. He said things were over. He never talked about you. He never mentioned the baby. Sujin's throat tightened. She looked away, rocking her daughter gently. And you believed that? I wanted to, Mireille replied, tears welling in her eyes. Because it made me feel less cruel. There was silence. Sujin studied her carefully. The woman sitting before her was not the confident, smug mistress she had imagined over and over in her sleepless nights. She looked young, human, lost. I thought he loved me, Mireille added, voice trembling. I thought he saw me, heard me, chose me. But when he saw the news about your labor, about the hospital, he didn't say a word. He just left. And he hasn't come back since. Sujin felt her breath hitch. He's confused, Mireille continued, then laughed bitterly. No, that's not even the right word. He's hollow. I thought I had him. But the truth is, no one really did. Not you. Not me. The words sank in deep. Not to excuse him, but to confirm everything Sujin already knew in her gut. Mireille looked at the baby again, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She's beautiful. She is, Sujin said softly, kissing her daughter's forehead. I came here to say I'm sorry, Mireille said. Not to ask for forgiveness. Just to let you know that I see it now. All of it. And I hope, her voice cracked, I hope you raise her to never need a man who makes her feel small. Sujin's heart clenched. It wasn't vindication. It wasn't closure. But it was real. And real was rare. She nodded once, slowly. Thank you for saying that. Mireille stood, wiping her tears. You don't have to accept it. I wouldn't if I were you. As she turned to leave, Sujin's voice stopped her. Did you love him? Mireille paused in the doorway. Yes, she said without turning. But it wasn't enough. It never is, when someone's heart isn't theirs to give. And with that, she was gone. Sujin sat in the stillness that followed, her heart trembling. She looked down at her daughter again, who stirred slightly and yawned. You'll never have to compete for someone's love, she whispered. You'll never be second to anyone's ambition, or silence, or guilt. Her phone buzzed. A message from the nurse's station. You have a visitor, Minsu. Should we let him in? She smiled through the tears still clinging to her lashes. Yes, always. And somewhere deep within her, something shifted. He said nothing right away. He didn't need to. His eyes did all the speaking. And Sujin, she felt it. That wordless understanding that only comes from someone who has watched your world fall and still decided to stay. You brought flowers, she said softly. He smiled. I remember you once said lilies remind you of home. Her breath caught slightly. That was so long ago. So far back in the folds of memory she'd forgotten she'd ever said it. Yet here he was, holding on to the small things like they mattered. Because to him, they always had. She gestured to the chair beside her. Sit with me. Minsu nodded and lowered himself into the seat quietly, placing the flowers on the small table. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers laced together. She looks like you, he said, glancing at the baby. The eyes, the shape of her mouth. Poor girl, Sujin said, a smile tugging at her lips. No, Minsu replied gently. Lucky girl. Her smile faded slowly, replaced by something softer, something vulnerable. "She'll need someone to look up to," she whispered. "Someone steady, someone who doesn't just disappear." Min-soo didn't answer right away. He looked down, then back at her. "I know this is delicate," he said carefully. "But Soo-jin, if you ever need help with her, with anything, you can call me. Anytime. I mean that." Soo-jin studied him, really studied him. There was no agenda behind his eyes. No expectation. No desire to take what wasn't offered. Just a presence. A quiet commitment. The kind that doesn't scream. The kind that stays. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted, lowering her gaze to her daughter. "I'm not ready to think that far. Right now, I want to protect her. That's all I can hold." Min-soo leaned back slightly. "Then let that be enough. Don't force tomorrow to come too early." A silence fell between them. Not heavy, just present. Then she asked, gently, "Did you know she came here, Mira?" His eyes flickered in surprise. "No," she apologized. "Said she didn't know I was at the party. That Ji-hoon told her we were over." Min-soo frowned but stayed quiet. "I don't know why, but hearing her say those words, it did something. Not because I forgive her. Not yet. But because for the first time, I didn't feel invisible." He nodded slowly. "You were never invisible, Soo-jin." He just refused to look. Her lips trembled. "I kept wondering what I did wrong. What I stopped being. I was so sure that the more I faded, the more he'd love me again." Min-soo's voice was quiet but firm. "You don't earn love by disappearing." She blinked fast, the sting in her throat rising again. "But that's what I did. I tried to become smaller, quieter, less of a burden. I let him walk over me because I thought I was protecting the baby. But I wasn't protecting her. I was teaching her what it looks like to be unloved." She looked up at Min-soo, her eyes filled with something raw and cracking wide open. "And I hate myself for that." Min-soo reached across and gently placed his hand over hers. "Don't," he said. "Don't hate the woman who survived everything alone. Don't hate the mother who's already giving her daughter something powerful. The truth. You left. You chose light. You chose her." Her breath hitched. A tear slid down her cheek and landed on the baby's blanket. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," he said. "But you're not weak." Her gaze locked on his. "And you're not alone." Another silence. But this time it was warm. The baby stirred again, and Min-soo stood up, adjusting the blanket around her tiny body with tender, precise fingers. "She's going to grow up knowing what real love feels like," he said. Soo-jin let the words settle over her like a prayer. Her fingers brushed over her daughter's cheek, and for the first time since the chaos began, she allowed herself to believe that was possible. The nurse came in a few minutes later to check Soo-jin's vitals and informed her she'd be discharged the next morning. As the nurse adjusted the foredrip, Min-soo stood and stepped out of the room to give her privacy. Soo-jin watched him go, something pulling gently in her chest. There was something about the way he moved, not in haste, not in retreat, but in quiet awareness. A man who didn't just enter a room, but waited to be welcomed. A man who showed up and stayed. Later that night, as the baby slept peacefully, Soo-jin scrolled through the messages on her phone. Ji-hoon had sent 2 more. The first asking if she needed anything. The second asking if she'd thought about his request to see more of the baby. She stared at the screen, then slowly turned it off. Not tonight. Maybe not for a long time. She lay back in bed, cradling her daughter close, and closed her eyes. Outside the hospital, the city pulsed on. Life moved forward, indifferent, relentless. Soo-jin stood near the window, dressed in a light beige coat, holding her daughter close to her chest. The hospital gown was gone, replaced by something simple, clean, hers. The baby's tiny hat covered her delicate head, and a pink ribbon clung gently to her wrist like a fragile promise. Min-soo appeared in the doorway, holding a small carrier with careful hands. He looked at Soo-jin, waiting for her signal. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice betrayed the tremor inside her. He stepped forward and gently took the baby so she could adjust her scarf. She watched the way he held the child. his arms sure, his gaze tender, as if she were something sacred. "She's lighter than I expected," he murmured. "She's stronger than she looks," Sujin replied, eyes glimmering. Minsu smiled. "Like her mother." They made their way through the hallway in. Silence. Nurses waved goodbye. An older woman near the elevators gave a quiet nod of encouragement. But as they approached the entrance, Sujin's steps began to slow. Parked just outside was a sleek black car. Jihoon. He stood leaning against the side, dressed in a long navy coat, eyes tired, hands buried in his pockets. He looked up as soon as he saw them. His gaze immediately dropped to the baby carrier. His jaw clenched. Sujin's breath caught. She hadn't expected him to show up this early. She hadn't answered his messages. Part of her thought he'd take the hint. But Jihoon was never good at silence. He only noticed absences when they threatened his sense of control. He stepped forward cautiously. "You're leaving." Minsu stiffened slightly beside her, but didn't say a word. Sujin nodded once. "We're going home." Jihoon looked at the baby, then at her. "I wanted to drive you. I already have a ride," she replied gently but firmly. Jihoon's jaw tensed. "Sujin, can we talk? Just a few minutes. Alone." Her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her bag. Minsu glanced at her, and without being asked, stepped away with the baby carrier. "I'll wait in the car." The moment he left, Jihoon stepped closer. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," he began, voice low. "But I saw the way you looked at her yesterday, and I realized I've never seen you like that. So calm, so whole." Sujin didn't speak. "I didn't know how to be a father," he continued. "I was scared. The pressure, the responsibility. And I made the worst choices because of it." She let out a quiet, almost broken laugh. "You didn't make a mistake, Jihoon. You made a life without me in it. That's not fear. That's abandonment." His shoulders dropped, as if those words hit somewhere deeper than he'd expected. "You're right," he said. "I abandoned you, and when I saw you walk out of that room, holding our daughter like the world didn't owe you a thing, I saw everything I gave up." Her throat tightened, but her eyes didn't waver. "I can't undo what I did," he said. "But I want to be there now. I want to try." She shook her head slowly. "You want the child now that she's real, but you don't want the weight that came with building her life. I did that, alone. I gave birth to her alone. I held her first tear, her first breath. I rocked her when I thought my body would give out from pain. You weren't there." "I know," he said, voice cracking. "But I'm here now." "And what if you're not tomorrow?" she asked. "What if it gets hard and you disappear again? What if she starts to love you, and you break her the way you broke me?" He didn't answer. Sujin's voice softened, but her words were steel. "She will know her father. I won't keep you from her. But you will not come and go as you please. You will not rewrite history. You will not feed her empty promises." Jihoon swallowed. "What does that mean?" "It means if you want to be in her life, you earn it," she said. "With patience, with presence, with time, not with words." Silence fell between them. Jihoon blinked fast, something desperate rising in his chest. "Will you ever forgive me?" Sujin looked at him then. Not with anger, not with pity, but with something deeper. "No," she whispered. "But one day I might not hate you." He closed his eyes, and that was the closest to peace she would give him. Without another word, she turned and walked away. She reached Minsu, who opened the car door and gently placed the baby's carrier inside. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah." He started the engine as they pulled away. Jihoon remained in the rearview mirror, shrinking with distance. For the first time, Sujin didn't feel hollow leaving him behind. She felt lighter. Minsu glanced at her. "You didn't have to face him like that. But you did." "I had to," she said, looking out the window. "I needed him to see what love looks like when it survives without him." And as the city passed by in quiet motion, Sujin reached back and gently touched her daughter's foot, wrapped in a soft sock. She paused in the center of the living room. The crib was still in the corner. The same blanket she folded weeks ago resting on top. The baby books were stacked by the small rocking chair. It all looked exactly the same. But she wasn't. "She's finally home," Minsu said softly, setting the bag down. Sujin nodded, rocking her daughter gently. "It feels different now. I didn't know if we'd ever come back here. Like this." He gave a small smile. "You did the hardest part, Sujin. And you didn't just survive it. You brought life with you." She turned to look at him, emotion stirring behind her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For being there when I broke, and when I began to heal." Minsu stepped closer, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick but not suffocating, just full of words unspoken, of choices waiting, of paths not yet taken. "I should let you rest," he finally said, glancing at his watch. "You've barely slept since the delivery." "I'll be okay," she replied, though the fatigue in her eyes betrayed her. He hesitated by the door. "Do you want me to come back tomorrow? Just to check in?" She nodded. "Yes, please." And then, more quietly, "I don't want to do this alone." "You won't," he promised. "Not ever again." She held his gaze a second longer, then turned toward the crib. He stepped out into the hallway, the soft click of the door closing behind him echoing like a final punctuation in a long paragraph of chaos. Alone now, Sujin stood with her daughter. She stared down into her tiny face, so peaceful, so unaware of the storm she'd been born into. "You don't know how strong you are yet," she whispered. "But I do. I felt it every time you moved, every time I wanted to give up and you kicked me like you were saying, 'Not yet, Mom.'" She gently laid the baby in the crib and watched her settle. Her tiny lips puckered, her fingers curled. And then, from across the room, a picture frame caught Sujin's eye. It was a photo of her and Ji-hoon from a few years ago, taken in the early days before the company, before the distance, before everything cracked and splintered. He had his arms around her. Her smile reached her eyes. Sujin stepped forward, picked up the frame slowly, and stared at it. Her reflection shimmered in the glass, overlapping with the woman she used to be. She remembered the way he used to hold her hand at the traffic lights, the way he whispered her name in the dark, the way he said, "You're all I'll ever need," and how quickly he'd forgotten that. Her fingers gripped the frame tighter, then loosened. She set the photo face down, not to erase it, but to stop it from watching her future. She turned back toward her daughter and sank into the rocking chair beside the crib. She leaned back, closed her eyes and breathed. That was when she heard the knock. 3 soft taps, deliberate. Her heart stilled. Not again. She stood slowly and made her way to the door, her body still healing, every step felt. She looked through the peephole and froze. It wasn't Ji-hoon. It was his mother. She hadn't seen her in over a year. Not since the last dinner, when Sujin was 5 months pregnant and completely invisible at the table, while her mother-in-law spoke about the company's image and how things should look. Opening the door felt like opening a wound, but Sujin did it. The older woman stood with perfect posture, dressed immaculately, a small paper bag in her hands. "Sujin," she said, her voice tight but not cold. "May I come in?" Sujin blinked, her fingers tightening around the door. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know," she said, "but I heard about the baby, and I wanted to meet her." Sujin hesitated. The woman before her was not cruel, but she had never been kind. She had been indifferent, distant, more concerned with appearances than emotions. But behind her eyes now was something unfamiliar. Was it regret or shame? Sujin stepped aside, silently. She entered the apartment slowly, glancing around, taking in the space, the quiet, the warmth. Her eyes fell on the crib. "She's sleeping," Sujin said, voice low. "I won't stay long," her mother-in-law replied. She placed the paper bag on the kitchen counter and stood awkwardly. "I brought soup. This from my mother's recipe. For after childbirth." Sujin said nothing. "I wasn't there," the woman said, voice trembling now. I should have been. For you. I was so caught up in how things looked that I forgot what really matters. I let my son make his choices, but I never questioned what those choices cost you. Sujin's lips parted, surprised. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she continued. I just wanted to say thank you for carrying her, for loving her, even when no one stood beside you. She looked toward the crib again, then back at Sujin. She deserves a better family than we gave her, and if you'll allow it, I'd like to be part of hers. Sujin's eyes filled with tears, not out of pain, but out of sheer disbelief. It wasn't an apology wrapped in excuses. It was a beginning. She nodded slowly. Maybe we can try. The woman stepped closer to the crib, peeked inside, and gasped softly. She looks like you. No, Sujin whispered. She looks like herself. And for the first time in a very long time, they both smiled. Her baby stirred slightly and let go with a tiny sigh, eyes fluttering closed. Sujin held her a little longer, memorizing the way her tiny hand gripped her finger, the way her breath puffed against her chest. She carefully laid her in the crib and covered her gently, and then she sat on the floor, just beside it. She needed the ground tonight. She folded her knees to her chest, her eyes fixed on the slow rise and fall of her daughter's chest. Her mind couldn't stop spinning. So much had changed in such a short time, and yet something inside her still felt suspended, like a part of her hadn't caught up. The part that still wanted to believe that love, even broken, could be salvaged. The part that had once whispered, maybe he'll come back different. There was a knock. Her body tensed instantly. It was late, too late for visitors. She stood, walked slowly to the door, her hand hovering over the knob. She didn't even have to look. She knew. She opened it anyway. Jihoon stood there in the dark hallway. No coat, no umbrella, rain streaking his hair, his suit damp, eyes wild and tired and not at all composed. I need to see her, he said, breathless. Sujin stepped into the doorway but didn't move aside. She's sleeping, she said. Please, he murmured. Just a moment. I've been walking for an hour. I didn't know where to go. I ended up here. He looked nothing like the man from the glossy magazines or the ballroom stage. There was no charm in his expression, only something desperate, something raw. I don't know who I am without her, he said suddenly. Without you. Sujin's jaw tightened. You had both of us, Jihoon, and you walked away. Don't come to my door now because your silence turned into loneliness. His breath caught. You think that's all this is? What else could it be? I haven't slept, he said, voice cracking. Not since the night I saw you in that hospital bed holding our daughter. You didn't even look at me, and I realized I became someone you had to protect her from. Sujin swallowed hard, blinking back the emotion rising in her chest. I thought I had time, he continued. I thought I could figure it out, fix things slowly, and you'd still be there. But the way you looked at me that day, I knew. I lost you before I even tried. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A silver bracelet, delicate and new. It has her name, he said. And mine. I had it made before she was born. I kept it in a drawer. I didn't know how to give it to you, or if I had the right. He placed it gently on the doorstep. Sujin stared at it. The tiny engraving caught the light. Haun from Appa. She knelt slowly, picked it up. The metal was cold against her palm. She has your eyes, he whispered. But when she looks at you, I see what love's supposed to be. Her voice came low, quiet, almost shaking. You saw that, and you still let it go. He stepped closer. I was a coward. I kept telling myself you'd always be waiting, that the silence between us was temporary. I kept thinking if I worked harder, if I succeeded more, I could come back to you like some kind of hero. But I wasn't building a life. I was building a wall. And I was on the other side, she said. He nodded. I know. I didn't climb over. I just kept stacking bricks. For a moment, they stood in the silence, years of marriage unraveling between them. Sujin looked up, her voice almost a whisper. She deserves more than a man who visits in the rain, full of regrets. I want to be better, he said, even if I'm not yours anymore. Her eyes closed briefly. She deserves stability, not appearances, not bursts of guilt wrapped in gifts. Jihoon's shoulders fell. So what now? You show up, she said. Not here. In her life. Quietly. Consistently. You don't knock on my door unannounced again. You call before visits. You meet her needs before your pride. You grow up. He nodded slowly, his face a mask of pain and something more. Something like acceptance. And me? He asked. Sujin's eyes didn't flinch. You'll always be her father. But I can't be your wife again. Jihoon, you buried us. And I had to dig myself out alone. He looked down, a long breath escaping his chest. You really loved me. I did, she said. So deeply I forgot to love myself. A tear slipped down his cheek. She didn't reach for it. I'll go, he whispered. Thank you for letting me say this. She stepped back, gently closed the door, then leaned against it, the bracelet still in her hand. The quiet in the apartment returning like a familiar friend inside the apartment. Everything was still. The baby slept soundly in her bassinet beside the couch, wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. The silver bracelet lay next to her, catching the light as if it held the weight of everything that had not been said. Sujin didn't know how long she stood there. Time had begun to move differently since Haun was born. Everything was slower, but heavier. There was a knock on the door. She blinked, not startled but weary. Another unexpected visitor? She walked slowly to the door, peeked through the peephole, and this time her body softened. Minsu. She opened the door before he could knock again. He stood there, slightly breathless, snow on his shoulders, cheeks flushed from the cold. You said I could come by, he said, smiling nervously. I brought breakfast and coffee. She stepped aside. Come in. You're freezing. He entered with his usual quiet energy, setting the paper bag on the kitchen counter. The snow caught me by surprise, he said, pulling off his coat. It's beautiful, though. Everything looks softer in snow. Doesn't it? Sujin nodded, watching him. It's quiet. I like the quiet now. He turned to her. How's she doing? Sleeping. Finally. And you? He asked gently. Sujin hesitated, then finally said, I'm learning how to breathe again. Minsu opened one of the containers, revealing warm rice porridge, carefully packed. This will help. Old recipe from my grandmother. She used to say it heals things that don't show on x-rays. She smiled faintly, and for a few moments, they ate in silence, seated at the small kitchen table. The only sound was the soft hum of the radiator and the distant murmur of a world still waking up outside. Then, Minsu's voice broke the quiet. He came last night, didn't he? She didn't look up. She simply nodded. I saw him, Minsu said, his voice even, though something flickered behind his eyes. He was walking down the street when I left the hospital. Looked like a man who'd just lost something he didn't know how to hold. Sujin set her spoon down slowly. He said all the things I once prayed to hear, and none of it made me want to go back. Minsu met her gaze. Good. That one word hung in the air. Not sharp, not triumphant, just honest. He brought a bracelet, she said, with her name, and his. I almost didn't take it, but it's hers, and I want her to know who she comes from, even if she doesn't understand why he couldn't stay. Minsu reached across the table, his hand brushing against hers. She'll understand, one day, when she sees how much you gave her. Sujin blinked quickly, swallowing the sudden lump in her throat. I feel like I've been surviving for so long that I don't know what it feels like to just live. You're doing it, he said, one breath at a time. They fell into another quiet. But it wasn't the silence of avoidance. It was the silence between two people who didn't need to fill the space just to feel present. And then, almost without thinking, Sujin spoke. I'm scared of depending on someone again. Minsu didn't flinch. You don't have to. She looked at him, startled. I'm not here to replace what he broke, he continued. I'm not here because I want you to need me. I'm here because I want to walk beside you. Even if it means nothing more than being the person you call when the baby won't stop crying at 3 a.m. Her eyes welled with tears. I don't know what to do with that kind of kindness anymore. You don't have to do anything, he said softly. Just let it be here. When you're ready. A soft cry came from the other room. Oh. Sujin stood quickly, wiping her tears. She's awake. Minsu followed her to the nursery door but stayed in the doorway, watching. Sujin lifted her daughter with practiced ease, holding her close, rocking gently. The baby blinked up at her with sleepy eyes, then nestled into her chest with a little sigh. She looks like peace, Minsu whispered. She is, Sujin said. She's the only thing that kept me from disappearing completely. Minsu stepped closer, but still didn't cross the invisible line. Can I hold her? Sujin hesitated, not out of fear, but out of the weight of what that question meant. Then slowly she nodded. She placed her daughter into his arms, and something in her breath shifted. Like a door she didn't know was still closed had creaked open. Minsu held the baby with gentle hands, his eyes wide, his smile unguarded. Hello, Haun, he said softly. I've been waiting to meet you properly. The baby stared at him, calm, content, unafraid. Sujin watched them, her hand unconsciously resting over her heart. And for the first time in a very long time, she let herself feel it. She had dreamed once of moments like this. A man, a child, a quiet home full of warmth. But that dream had burned down to ash, and she'd long since learned to survive without reaching for it again. Yet here it was, and it terrified her. She's so still, Minsu whispered, rocking gently. But I can feel everything in her. She's listening, even now. Sujin nodded, her throat tight. She watches everything, especially me. Sometimes it scares me how much she sees. She sees love, he said, without looking up. She sees strength. She turned her face slightly, trying to hide the way those words pierced her. I'm trying, she murmured. Minsu glanced at her then. You don't have to try anymore. You're already doing it. She let out a soft, shaky breath and walked to the couch, sitting down slowly. Her body still ached in places she didn't speak of. Childbirth had marked her, not just physically, but in the space behind her ribs where everything had changed. Minsu joined her, still holding the baby. They sat in silence for a while, letting the snow fall beyond the window, letting the warmth between them expand without pressure. Then he said, carefully, "What happens now?" Sujin didn't answer right away. She looked at Haun, sleeping again with a peace that felt unearned by the chaos she'd been born into. I don't know, she said. I thought I'd have answers by now. But I only know what I don't want. Minsu nodded. Sometimes that's enough to start. She looked at him then, the weight of the last few weeks gathering in her expression. I don't want to build my life around regret anymore. I don't want to look back at who hurt me and forget who stayed. Minsu's fingers brushed the edge of the baby's blanket. I'll stay, he said simply, in whatever way you'll let me. Her eyes filled, not with pain, but with the ache of possibility. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. You don't have to know, he said. You just have to let it happen slowly. But what if I hurt you? She asked, the words escaping like a confession. What if I'm too scared to love again the right way? Then we'll walk through the fear together, he replied. You've already walked through fire. What's fear next to that? She looked away, the emotion too much for a moment. Her hand brushed her cheek, catching a tear before it fell. I want her to grow up seeing love that doesn't leave, she said. But I also want her to see a woman who chose herself first. Minsu smiled softly. Then show her both. You don't have to choose one over the other. A knock at the door broke the stillness. Sujin flinched. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her eyes darted to Minsu. He stood up slowly, careful not to wake the baby, and handed her back to Sujin. Stay here, he said gently. I'll check. She cradled Ha-un close, the sudden change in atmosphere tightening her chest. From the doorway, she heard muffled voices. Low, tense. Min-soo opened the door wider, and Ji-hoon stepped in. Soo-jin's heart dropped. Her arms tightened instinctively around her daughter. Why are you here? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. Ji-hoon stood in the threshold, eyes flicking from Min-soo to her. I didn't come to fight, he said. I came because something happened. She stood slowly, her spine stiff with instinct. What? He looked down for a moment, then back at her. My father had a stroke. He's in intensive care. The words landed like a stone. Soo-jin didn't know how to respond. For all the pain Ji-hoon had caused her, his father had once been kind to her. Stern, traditional, but never cruel. I thought you should know, Ji-hoon added. They asked for you. I think he wants to see you. Soo-jin's face went still. Why would he want to see me? I don't know, Ji-hoon said, voice tight. Maybe he wants to say goodbye. Or maybe he wants to apologize too late like the rest of us. She sat back down, Ha-un now stirring against her chest. I can't leave her, she said. I'll stay, Min-soo offered, stepping forward. Ji-hoon glanced at him, but said nothing. Soo-jin looked between them. Her daughter, the man who had broken her, the man who had waited. Everything in her life was no longer about what was right or wrong. It was about what felt true. She kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, I'll be back soon. She handed Ha-un to Min-soo, her fingers lingering. Then she walked past Ji-hoon and out the door, not because she owed anyone anything, but because some endings required one last breath before they could be buried. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already broken between them. He led her through a side hallway to a private room with the blinds drawn. The air smelled like antiseptic and fading cologne. A monitor beeped softly in the corner. His father lay in the bed, pale and sunken, machines breathing for him, tubes running from his arms. A nurse adjusted an four-bag and nodded at Ji-hoon before stepping out. Soo-jin hesitated in the doorway. The man who once ruled the boardroom like an emperor, who'd looked down at her with cool detachment the day she married his son, now looked smaller than memory allowed. I don't know if he'll wake up again, Ji-hoon said quietly. He had another seizure this morning. The doctors, they're not optimistic. Soo-jin took a slow breath. Why did you ask me here? Ji-hoon turned to her, his eyes red-rimmed. Because he said your name. She blinked. What? He was in and out just before they intubated him. He barely knew where he was. But he said your name. Twice. Soo-jin. Like it mattered. Like it meant something. She swallowed hard. Her throat tightened with emotions she didn't know how to name. I think he regretted a lot, Ji-hoon added. Especially how he treated you. She stepped forward slowly, unsure whether her presence in that room made sense or not. But something deeper than logic pulled her closer. Maybe it was for herself. Maybe it was for closure. Maybe it was just the last thread of respect for the man who, in his own way, had shaped the story she was still trying to rewrite. She stood at the edge of the bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest. You never really saw me, she whispered. Not as a daughter-in-law, not as a person. I think maybe you thought I wasn't strong enough for your world. Her fingers brushed the blanket. But I was. I just didn't want to become cold to survive in it. Ji-hoon stood behind her, listening, not interrupting. And now your son. Her voice cracked slightly. He's trying to find pieces of what he broke. Maybe it's too late. Maybe it's not. But I won't build my life on maybes anymore. She looked back at Ji-hoon then. I didn't come here for him, she said. I came to put this part of us down. To bury what's been rotting in silence. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the man in the bed. He raised me to lead, to succeed. But he never taught me how to stay. How to hold on to someone when it really mattered. You don't have to say that to me, Soo-jin replied softly. Say it to yourself. Say it to her. I will, he said. Every day. Even if she never forgives me. Soo-jin stepped away from the bed, her chest heavier than when she entered. Not from grief, but from the finality of it all. She had expected anger. She had prepared for discomfort. But what she felt was emptiness. A closing door. She turned toward the exit. But Jihoon's voice stopped her again. "Did you love me, Sujin? Or did you love who I used to be?" She looked over her shoulder, eyes shimmering. "I loved the man you were before the world got to him," she said. "The one who looked at me like I was enough. And I mourned him every single day you stayed and made me feel like I wasn't." Jihoon's shoulders fell, and for once, he didn't try to explain. He didn't ask her to stay. He just let her walk away. She stepped out into the hallway, leaving behind machines, regrets, and an empire that had never truly made room for her. By the time she reached the front doors of the hospital, the snow had thickened. She pulled her scarf tighter and stepped out into the cold. The city was blanketed in white, the sound of everything muffled, as if the world was pausing, just for a moment. She walked slowly down the street, each step pressing into the snow like a declaration. She could feel the ache in her hips, the tight pull in her shoulders, but inside, something had loosened. When she turned the corner, she saw Min-soo waiting at the bench near the taxi stop, holding Ha-eun against his chest, a blanket wrapped around them both. The sight of them made her stop in her tracks. He stood when he saw her, his eyes instantly searching her face. "How was it?" he asked. "Quiet," she said. "Final." He looked relieved to see she hadn't crumbled. "She didn't wake. I think my heartbeat put her to sleep." She smiled. It came slowly, gently, like a sunrise breaking through the clouds. "You're good with her," she said. "I love her," he replied without hesitation. "And I don't say that because I want anything from you." Her eyes burned. He stepped closer. "You don't owe me anything, Sujin. Not your future, not your heart. But if you ever feel ready to offer them again, I'll be here." She looked down at Ha-eun, still fast asleep, her mouth forming a tiny O, her hands curled into fists. Then she looked back at Min-soo. "I don't want to be rescued," she said. "I know," he replied. "You've already saved yourself. And I don't know what comes next," she added. "That's okay," he said. "Let's just start with today." She nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Okay." And as they stood there beneath the snow, a woman who had been left behind, and a man who had always stayed within reach, a new chapter began. Without noise, without promises, neither of them spoke for a while. The baby slept easily in the quiet, her tiny face pressed to Sujin's shoulder, her breathing steady and warm. Sujin leaned her forehead against the window, her eyes tracing the frost forming in delicate lines across the glass. "I didn't expect it to feel like that," she whispered suddenly. Min-soo turned toward her gently. "Like what?" "Empty," she said. "I thought I'd feel anger again. Or pain. Something sharp. But it was just silence. Like there was nothing left to fight." Min-soo nodded slowly. Sometimes silence is grief finding its final place. She looked down at her daughter and then closed her eyes for a moment. "I spent so long surviving, Min-soo. I think I forgot how to feel safe. I forgot how to even want peace without wondering when it would vanish." "You don't have to be afraid of peace anymore," he said softly. "Not every quiet means something is falling apart." She turned her head toward him, her expression fragile but honest. "What if I don't know how to live without pain?" He met her eyes with something steady. "Then let this be the beginning of learning." The taxi pulled to a stop in front of her building. Min-soo stepped out first, brushing snow from the sidewalk with his boot, as the driver opened the door for Sujin. He reached for her hand, and she took it. Inside the apartment, everything was still. Warm, still hers. Nothing had changed. But now she walked in differently, not dragging her grief behind her, not stepping into a shadow. She walked in with her child in her arms, and a man by her side who hadn't asked her to be anything but herself. She laid Ha-eun in her crib gently and lingered by her side, adjusting the blanket, smoothing her hair with her fingertips. Then she stepped back, watching her for a while in silence. Min-soo stood in the hallway, uncertain if he should stay. "Would you sit with me a little longer?" Sujin asked, her voice soft. He nodded and followed her to the living room. They sat on the couch, close but not touching. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, then whispered, "He asked me if I ever really loved him." Minsu looked at her, waiting. "And I did," she said. "But I was in love with who he was before power changed him. Before he stopped trying. Before he forgot I was a person." "Do you think he loved you?" Minsu asked quietly. She thought for a long time. "In the beginning, yes. But then, I think he just loved the idea of what I made him feel. Not who I actually was." Minsu sat back slowly. "You were always too much for a man like that." She turned her head, almost surprised. He smiled faintly. "Not too much like a burden. Too much like truth. You asked for honesty. For presence. For growth. That kind of love terrifies men who only love themselves." Sujin's eyes filled again, not with sorrow, but with quiet understanding. "I think I started to shrink," she said, "to make space for him to stay." "I know," Minsu whispered. "I watched it happen." She turned to him, voice trembling. "Why didn't you say anything?" He looked down at his hands. "Because I didn't want to become another man telling you who you should be. I waited, selfishly, maybe, for the day you'd remember who you were on your own." "And now?" she asked. He looked at her with that calm steadiness she'd come to rely on. "Now, I want to walk beside the woman who remembered, and chose herself anyway." Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. She didn't hide them. "Minsu," her voice caught. "You were always the safe place I didn't know how to run to." "I don't want to be a place you run to," he said. "I want to be the one you walk toward, when you're ready." She nodded slowly, wiping her face. "I'm tired, but I want to learn what that walk feels like." He stood slowly, knowing the moment needed breath, not pressure. "I should go," he said gently. "Let you rest." She stood too, following him to the door. Snow still drifted softly outside the window, casting a glow across the floor. He turned before stepping out. "Call me if she wakes in the night. If you wake and need anything. Even if it's just to hear someone say you're not alone." "I will," she whispered. "I promise." He opened the door, but just before leaving, he looked back once more. "She's lucky," he said. "Not just because she has you, but because you chose to become someone who could stand again, even after the world bent you." Sujin didn't respond. She just watched him go, the warmth of his words lingering in the space he left behind. She closed the door quietly and leaned her back against it, her hand over her heart. And for the first time in years, the silence in the room felt like peace, not punishment. She walked back to the crib and knelt beside it, watching Haun sleep. "Sweet girl," she whispered. "Everything changes now, but grief doesn't knock before it enters." On the third morning, the phone rang. She picked it up from the kitchen counter, cradling Haun in one arm. The caller ID was a hospital line. Her chest tightened. She stepped into the bedroom and answered softly. "Hello, Mrs. Han," came the nurse's voice, low and gentle. "We're calling with an update about your father-in-law. I'm sorry to say he passed early this morning." The silence that followed was strange. Not a gasp, not a collapse, just the dull ringing of everything inside her going still. "I understand," she said after a moment. "Thank you for calling." She hung up and just stood there, one hand pressed against her daughter's back, the other trembling slightly at her side. Jihoon would call. She knew it. He did 2 hours later. "Sujin." His voice was hollow. "He's gone." "I know. They're planning the funeral for Friday. My mother wants you there." She didn't respond at first. Then, softly, "Does she know why I left?" Jihoon paused. "She does now." "I don't know if I'm ready to stand beside you again," she admitted. "You won't have to," he said quickly. I want them to see you, to see what I lost, to see what they never really knew." She sighed quietly. "This isn't about revenge, Jihoon. Not for me." "I know," he said, "but maybe it's about closing the circle." The line went quiet. Then she said, I'll come. Not for you. For her, to show her strength can survive the things we think will destroy it. Friday came too soon. The funeral was held in a private hall surrounded by stone gardens. Snow still lingered on the edges of the ground, unmelted, undisturbed. Sujin wore a simple black coat and stood at the back of the room, alone. She'd left Haun with Min-soo, his hands steady, his voice calming even as she walked away, unsure of why she was going. As she stepped inside, eyes turned, not with cruelty, but with recognition, with whispers. She walked slowly, chin high, heart calm. Ji-hoon stood at the front, his posture rigid, hands clenched. He saw her, and his eyes softened, not with expectation but with regret. After the service, as people filtered into the garden to offer condolences, his mother approached Sujin, her eyes wet, face pale beneath her veil. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't," Sujin admitted. "But then I thought, maybe he needed to see me one last time, even if he couldn't speak." "He asked for you," the older woman said, "over and over the day before he